Welcome to the Power to Flourish podcast, where science meets the art of a beautiful life. I'm Dr. Andrea Line, positive psychologist, giftedness expert and coach, and modern-day spiritual godmother to brilliant, deep-feeling women. This isn't just another self-help podcast. It's a sanctuary, a sacred space to come back to yourself. Each week, we'll explore the emotional experience of gifted, sensitive women and what it means to live a life that feels as beautiful as it may look. Because flourishing isn't a luxury, it's your birthright, and your life is waiting. This is the Power to Flourish podcast. Let me ask you something. Have you always felt just a little different, not just emotionally, but maybe intellectually? Like your mind never really turns off, like you crave more depth, more meaning, more realness than most people seem to want to go? Maybe you've been told you're intense, or maybe you've even felt just like a little out of place your whole life. Too much for some, maybe not enough for others, and maybe, just maybe, you've wondered if there's something more going on underneath it all. If so, this episode is for you. Today, I want to talk about what it really means to be a gifted woman, not in the stereotypical way necessarily that we think of like child prodigies or kids who like skip multiple grades, but just in the very real, nuanced, and often hidden ways giftedness shows up in adult women, especially those of us who are never identified. So we're going to go deeper than pop psychology lists or productivity hacks, because this isn't about being smarter than anyone else. It's actually about finally understanding the depth and the intensity and the brilliance that has always lived inside you. So first, let's just define giftedness briefly from an academic standpoint. And let me tell you, before I dive into this, there are many professionals in this field that I have been in for well over 20 years, maybe 25 years now. And if you get in a room with all of them, there'll be a lot of discussion about like, how do we actually define giftedness? The thing is, it's a term, it's a label. I don't actually love the word gifted, but I use it here because it's the label that was chosen, right? It's a social construct, really. So what I'm going to say here, anyone could disagree with or have something to add. I'm trying to simplify it a little bit for the purpose of this podcast, and we don't need to have like an academic, dissertation on the definition of giftedness, and I'm not writing the textbook on it. But if you're interested, there are a lot of resources out there, and you can just do your own deep dive. Probably if you're gifted and you don't know much about giftedness, you probably want to go do that. But for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to talk about it in a way that is just more practical, right? We're not going to get theoretical. And we're not also going to talk about it from like an educational perspective, which is oftentimes, understandably, what we're talking about when we talk about giftedness. So in educational psychology, and when I started graduate school back in, I think it was 2000, maybe 2001, I started in a doctoral program actually in educational psychology, specializing in giftedness. It was at the University of Virginia. There weren't really that many programs in the nation at that time. It was one of the top programs for that study in the nation. I think the others at the time may have been Yale and Stanford. And at all of those schools also, we had a National Research Center for the Gifted and Talented. So all of that to say, this is my background. And in that space, we often start as a starting place for defining giftedness. And there's much more. Again, there's like a lot that is in addition to this, but we typically are referring to individuals whose intelligence score, so like on an IQ test, on a real IQ test, not something you're taking off social media, those scores are falling about 2 standard deviations above the mean on a normal curve. So if you don't like math and you didn't take statistics, and what I just said was like, ooh, I don't know what she means. What that means is the average IQ score is 100. And 2 standard deviations above that's the mean, the average, is around 130. So for a gifted to be identified as gifted, oftentimes we're talking around IQ of like 130 and higher. But again, it's just one slice of the story for lots of reasons. We don't just think of giftedness in this like narrow view of what the IQ score says, but it is a factor, right? The intelligence is sort of like the starting point of how we start thinking about giftedness. So that's just one slice of the story. For lots of reasons, whether it's cultural reasons, the validity and, reliability of IQ tests for certain groups of, people versus others. There's a lot of reasons why an IQ score is not enough. And it's also why I'm not focusing on it, but I do want to put it out there just so if you're really brand new to this concept of giftedness, you can have some idea of like, what are we talking about here, right? Basically, you're pretty smart. So you don't need to necessarily know your IQ score. Although if you really want to, you can hire a psychologist and they'll do the testing. I used to do that kind of testing back in the day. I do not do it now. But many women who are gifted, even profoundly gifted, and there are levels of giftedness, but many of them were never identified. Again, lots of different reasons. School districts identify, there's no like standard way across the nation. So especially if you're a woman of color or you come from a lower socioeconomic background, all things that I can relate to, by the way, maybe, I'm not going to get into a philosophical discussion right now about gifted education and gifted programs because that's like a different debate. But right now I'm just talking about why many women who are indeed gifted might not know that they're gifted. Maybe they weren't identified. Also, if you have a learning disability or some kind of learning issue, maybe a processing issue, maybe ADHD or some other emotional issues when you were younger, that can mask the giftedness, so to speak. So I won't go into a laundry list, but just know you may be one of those women. You may be listening to this right now and say, well, I don't know. I felt like I was pretty smart in school, but I struggled with this, or I felt like I didn't know how to do math, right? And so you either you told yourself you weren't that smart, even though you were brilliant in other areas, or your school district didn't identify you as gifted because maybe you were underachieving or struggling in math. I'm just using this as an example because it's especially prominent for little girls and teenage girls and women, right? This whole math thing. So there's lots of different reasons. And then you just kind of go on in your life. And maybe you even thought like, no, I've known I'm pretty smart, or like school came kind of easy for me. But yeah, I've just never thought of myself as gifted. And most adults, we don't really label ourselves. It's a weird word. To be totally honest, even when I was thinking about my business and everything, this is my specialty, but I really struggled with just even using this word at all because there's a lot of baggage that can come with it. But again, we're just using it. It's just a word. There's a definition. It's a construct. So maybe you relate to being a perfectionist when you were younger and you were like a perfectionist, but you kind of like flew under the radar. Again, maybe you had trauma. Maybe you had just like really tough family things going on. And so you're smart, but like you were just dealing with so much more than another kid in your classroom who's also really smart, but they had like a nice, healthy family and they didn't have financial issues and they had like all resources and, it's just different. You may be someone who's really creative, intuitive, emotionally in tune. And that is a kind of giftedness that's not necessarily getting noticed in the academic world in that schooling lens, which is, again, why I'm saying when I talk about it, we're adults now, right? We're not in school. So we're not using it to identify people for the sake of providing the right educational programming. I am saying, here you are, you're an adult, you have grown and you have these experiences, which I'm going to talk more about. You have some characteristics about yourself. Maybe you didn't realize they were related to this giftedness piece. And I just want to educate you and help you navigate this journey, especially if this is all brand new to you. So giftedness, again, it's not about just being book smart or getting straight A's. Oftentimes there are many gifted people who are not getting straight A's for lots of different reasons. At a certain point in my career, I specialized not just with giftedness, but there's another term, which I won't go into right now. It's called twice exceptional, twice exceptionality. And a lot of I worked with adolescents at this time, and many of them were super, super smart, really, really brilliant, but they were not getting straight A's. And you may have a child like this, actually, especially if you're gifted. You probably have gifted kids. And it can be so frustrating for the parents of these kids, for the teachers of these kids, and for the kids themselves to feel like, I know I feel like I'm pretty smart, but like not getting the grades, right? Like, what's wrong with me? So do not equate good grades with giftedness per se. What I really want you to take away from this, and these are the things I'm going to highlight in a moment, these 5 signs, it's about a different way of processing the world, right? You're wired differently. We could use the term neurodiversity, which is a hot term these days. That term, at least when I was starting off 25 years ago, certainly wasn't popular like it is today, right? So it definitely falls under the umbrella of neurodiversity. But what you need to understand is there is an intensity. There's an intellectual intensity. There's an intellectual complexity. There is oftentimes this emotional intensity, oftentimes a heightened intuition, creativity. Now, all of this is, of course, on a spectrum, and there's not like one kind of gifted person because we're all different. But overall, there's the word I would use is intensity. It can also result in this idea of like just existential overwhelm, right? It's just like you're just in this world and you're just overwhelmed by the world. It's just like living with a brain that's always on and a heart that feels everything deeply. And when you don't have language for that, it can feel like you're the problem, when in reality, you're just gifted. You're gifted. You're just being in the world in a way that the world rarely recognizes. But if we grow up this way, we don't know any different. No one teaches us this. We're not identified, perhaps. Again, it's very natural and normal to sort of internalize this feeling like I'm the one that's different, therefore I'm the problem. So 5 signs you might be a gifted woman. Number 1, you think in spirals, not straight lines. So let's start here. If your mind never shuts off, if you tend to think in loops and layers or multi-dimensional webs instead of just straight lines all the time, this one is for you. Now, it's not to say that gifted women can't also be very like linear thinkers and gifted in that way either. Don't misunderstand. But if this is you're thinking in spirals, I want to unpack this just a little bit. Gifted women often process information quickly and deeply. Let me say that again. Gifted women often process information quickly and deeply. So it's not just fast processing speed. It's like you're deeply processing. And if this is you know what this is like, right? You see the connections, you see the implications, you see the bigger picture, you see the things that other people just don't naturally see. And you might have gone through the world being like, why do they not see it? How do they not see it? But you're a gifted woman, so you see it. You don't just want the what, you want the why, the how, the ripple effect, right? You're processing all of these things. You ask the big questions. You love learning. You're often the one staying up late with 10 tabs open, following your curiosity down beautiful rabbit holes. Can anyone relate to that? My husband teases me. That definitely is me. And at the same time, you might also feel sort of like mentally restless. You know what I mean? It's not that you're scattered per se, although that may also be what you're feeling, but it's like your brain is playing chess while the world is playing checkers. Let that sink in. So when I was a little girl, there were plenty of times when, whether it was in the classroom or outside of the classroom, and this certainly followed me into my adulthood, where I just thought, you of course assume everyone's mind works like yours does. You have no reason as a young child to believe anything different, right? And so I would be asking all these questions and I would be thinking on all these different layers, and I would learn something in school, but it made me think of this other thing, and I would connect it to this thing and this thing. And I'd come in and, I, like, you might be able to relate to this. I'd come into class and I would be wanting to understand and asking questions about things that really most of the other kids just weren't interested. And the teacher would have to figure out what to do with me. Do you know what I mean? Now, let's translate this to adult life, right? Maybe you're in a work meeting. Now, depending on where you work, this may or may not be an issue. Your gifts, of course, are highly valued, right? If you're processing information quickly and deeply, you're seeing connections, you're seeing the implications that other people aren't seeing. But you start asking questions, sometimes people don't like that, and then we can feel like, ooh, I shouldn't ask that question. Or maybe we've already learned way earlier, I shouldn't ask those questions. I shouldn't bring that up, right? And so this is the first sign. You're just thinking very deeply, and you're thinking in a more complex way. That's probably the best way to put it. That is sign number one. Now, number two is you feel everything deeply. So lucky you don't just think deeply, you feel deeply. So whether it's joy, grief, awe, heartbreak, your emotions, most likely, are rich and layered. So this is very true for me, and it's not true for everyone. Again, not true for every gifted person, gifted woman, but this definitely is true for me. Art and music and beauty, they move you. And it's not that they don't move other people, but because you feel everything so deeply, it's like, it's almost hard to explain to people the way it moves you. Have you ever just been moved to tears because something is just so beautiful, or you see a piece of artwork, or you hear some piece of music live, or, I found myself, I remember one year, this is when you really know you're emotionally intense. I remember when I was younger watching the Olympic figure skating, on TV. It was a long time ago. And I don't know if it was Christy Yamaguchi, like this, it's like dating me, but it was just such a beautifully executed performance. And I just started crying. And I remember being in our living room and then thinking, I'm sure people think I'm crazy, right? But so it's not just beauty in the natural aesthetic, but it's excellence, right? It's just they just touch you in a way. Maybe you've been like that, even as a little girl. And sadly, in our world, in our culture today, instead of being celebrated, you probably heard messages like, you're too much, you're too sensitive, maybe too dramatic, maybe a little too emotional. I don't know if any of that resonates. It maybe stings a little bit. And so over time, you learn to hide that part of you, or to just subdue it. Let's not be too much, right? I'm emotional, but can't be too emotional. I might be a little dramatic, but let's not be too dramatic. But I just want you to hear, this is how you're created. This is just how you're wired. This is your depth. It's not a flaw. There's not you weren't created with this oops, made a mistake there. Wasn't supposed to be that emotional. Whoops, don't know how to fix it, right? No, it's not a mistake. This is part of your gifted wiring. This is part of it. It's part of what comes with the package oftentimes. Emotional intensity is really a hallmark of giftedness. And it means you're just deeply alive to the human experience. And isn't that beautiful when you think of it that way? You're deeply alive to the human experience. So yes, you might experience grief in a way that just like tears you apart, but you get to experience joy in a way that probably a lot of people won't ever get to experience. So just know, all those times when you felt maybe someone told you you were overreacting, you were just feeling with your full capacity. Just tell yourself that next time. I'm just feeling with my full capacity. It's okay. Okay. Number 3, the sign is you crave meaning, not just achievement. So you may have been successful in school, at work, or in life. You probably were, at least in some area, and you know that, and you're good at that. Like you can achieve. But achievement alone doesn't fulfill you. There's this part of you that has always longed for more. Not more accolades, although sure, we all like that because we're human. Great. But you realize quickly, probably especially if you're a gifted kid, right? You got a lot of accolades, and maybe you even learn to like live for the accolades, but at a certain point, especially if you're older and live more life, you just know you're ready for more meaning. You want more beauty, you want more alignment, you want more soul. Like this is the work, this is the kind of thing that I love helping gifted women get in their life. Just really get this, because some of us may be craving that, but we haven't actually fully gotten there to experience it yet. That might be you right now, right? So you can hit the milestones and climb the ladder, check all the boxes, but unless it resonates with your inner values, it just starts to feel empty. So if that's you and you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, that's how I feel. Like I've done it all. Did all the things. I've succeeded. I've done the things I wanted to do. And I feel really empty. Just understand that you are driven, and everyone is driven by purpose. It's not like gifted women are alone in this, but you are so high capacity and you can achieve so much that more than probably the average person, in your lifetime, that you need purpose much more than the performance. It's just not enough for you. It's not going to be enough. So, and maybe you walked away from something that looked really impressive, but it just didn't feel right. Has that ever happened to you? Have you had the strength to walk away from something that like looked really shiny, looked really good, could make you look really good, but you're like, it just doesn't feel right. Or maybe, I think most of us can relate to this. I certainly can. You reached a goal. It could have been a big goal, probably was a big goal. You reached it. And then you thought, is this all there is? Is this it? So that is sign number 3. You are craving more meaning and purpose because, again, you're feeling so deeply, you're thinking so deeply, all these things just goes beyond achievement. Achievement is never going to be enough for you. And then sign number 4, this is a little bit related to number 2, you feel everything deeply, but number 4 is you've been labeled too much. Too much. This one is so common, right? It's like you've been called intense. Maybe you've been called too opinionated. Maybe you've been called too serious, or maybe you're too dramatic or too idealistic. Whatever it is, too much. You're just too much, right? So you are not alone. And these labels that people put on us, whether we were little kids and we got the labels, or we were teenagers and we got the labels, or maybe we were in college and we got the labels, or we walked into our adult life, we're still getting the labels. It is often just the world's way of trying to make sense of your bigness, your emotional, your intellectual, your energetic intensity, just like you're big, right? And it feels like too much for the world. And then when you hear those messages enough, you can start to shrink. Again, I can so relate to this. Nothing I'm sharing here is ever anything that I haven't like lived out myself, right? You just learn to tone it down. You got to tone it down, try to make yourself more digestible. figure out how to say the thing so it's not too much. Now, obviously, there's wisdom in the world of how to relate to people. I don't mean never use wisdom in those, right? There's times and places. But overall in your life, this is just who you are. And rather than internalizing, like, again, there's something wrong with you, that you're too much and that therefore you have to shrink. I want you to understand that, again, this intensity isn't the problem. You being an intense person, you being a big person, you being an opinionated person, it's not the problem. If you can reframe this and say, wow, this is my power. This is what makes me, this is what I have to give to the world. Even if the world doesn't make sense of it yet, they can't make sense of it yet, but this is your power and it's so sacred. And so sometimes we have to figure out, like, how do we package this, or how do we carry it into the world, or how do we help people understand, and how do we bless and release goodness into the world through this bigness, how we've been created, rather than feeling like the only way we can go through the world is to get smaller and like shrink. So that is number 4. You've been just labeled too much. And finally, number 5, you often feel alone, even when you're surrounded by people. So perhaps you have friends. Maybe you have lots of friends, or maybe you have a couple really close friends. You probably have a career. Many of you have family, right? And from the outside, anyone looking, it looks like, you're connected. You could have tons of people in your world, but inside, here's one of the signs. And you may not feel this quite so much at this, depending on your age. I definitely felt like this more when I was younger than I do now. But again, depending on where you are on your journey, have you ever felt this feeling like, I have so many people in my life, but I just feel alone? It's really about feeling unseen and misunderstood, and this sense of otherness, right? Like, I'm just not like everyone else. And so you feel a little outside. And you may even quote unquote fit in pretty well, actually. It's not like you're socially, some people might identify with feeling a little socially awkward, but other gifted women are very socially gifted, and it's not an issue. It's not really about your social finesse. It's about how you feel on the inside. And oftentimes we as gifted women, we long for these deep, soulful conversations where you want to be met intellectually and emotionally, and probably like spiritually, and just all those parts of you, but most of the time it just feels like maybe people don't really get you, or there's just not enough time in our world and how it is today where you can be seen on all those levels in the fullness of who you are. And that kind of loneliness, again, it's not about being physically alone. It's about not being mirrored. And I think when you're a gifted woman, sometimes people really don't quite know how to mirror back. Even if they create space for it, they might not know how. So I can speak again from personal experience that this is one of the most painful experiences, this feeling of just being othered, unseen. And because we're wired for depth, but we live in this world that just often, skims the surface, that it's a mismatch. Let's just say it's a mismatch. So, maybe you really felt that when you were younger, and maybe not so much today, but I just want to remind you, you weren't being overly sensitive, or maybe it's a today thing. But you're longing for connection, as we all do as humans, but you're longing as gifted women for a kind of connection that reflects the truth of who you are. And that's it. And part of what I would love to do, and why I created this podcast and started this conversation and send out my sanctuary letters every week and write my blog and all the things, is that, even if you are a woman listening right now and you never work with me, right? Most people listening to this probably will never work with me one-on-one or even in a group capacity necessarily. But just hearing this and just understanding that you're not alone and that there's nothing wrong with you, but also as an encouragement for you to find the people, the places that can mirror that for you is really important. So in closing, these are just 5 of the signs, but honestly, there are dozens, so many more signs that you could be a gifted woman. These are just 5 that I picked out. Giftedness in women is complex, it's nuanced, and it's very often misunderstood. So just know, this was like a little deep dive. And if anything in today's episode resonated, I want to invite you to take my free quiz. Are you a gifted woman? It's a gentle, fun, eye-opening way to explore whether you might be a gifted woman who was missed. And also just kind of see like, what are some of these traits and characteristics beyond these 5 that might resonate for you? Understand this is not a formal assessment. This is not some tried and true, like something we do in a clinic. This is just a free quiz online. So I created it just for you. You can find the link in the show notes, and you could also find it on my website, andrealine.com. And if you're thinking of someone who needs to hear this, someone who's been called too much or has always felt a little different, or maybe you're just like, I kind of feel like she fits this description. She sounds like a gifted woman. I want to encourage you to send this episode her way. Let her know, girl, she is not alone. There are others like you. And if this message spoke to you, I would love, love, love for you to subscribe, share the show, and leave a review. It helps this podcast reach more women like us and the ones who are ready to understand their gifts and finally live in alignment with who they are. Until next time, keep flourishing. Thank you for listening to the Power to Flourish podcast. I hope today's conversation left you feeling more seen, more supported, and more deeply connected to yourself. And if this episode resonated, would you take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend? It's one of the best ways to help this work reach the women who need it most. You'll find show notes, links, and resources from today's episode at powertoflourish.com. And now just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It's not therapy, medical advice, or a substitute for professional support. And listening doesn't make me your therapist or doctor, though if you're looking for a coach, you know where to find me. All right, beautiful one, that's it for now. Until next time, trust yourself, honor your gifts, and keep flourishing.